Hello, welcome to Yoga Story Time. We are continuing to read An Introduction to Yoga by Annie Besant. This was published in 1907. So just to give some context there, where we left off is in the description. So there's 2 videos so far, 2 hours of reading these lectures. So we're still on lecture 1, and we're just going to continue to read these. This is not a daily series, but I'll pop on here every once in a while and get into some reading of yogic texts. So let me see where we were. Last time we talked about samadhi. And what's really interesting, actually, and I'll try to remember, I'll write this down to get this in the comments, but there is a fellow yoga professional, Jason Crandall, who I just watched. He just uploaded a video a few hours ago about samadhi, about the 8-limb practice of yoga. So I highly, highly recommend that because I think he made it really, really accessible. So I will get that in. I'll update the description to add that in there. Actually, let me just go ahead and, this is live stream, so we can take a little bit of time here. Let me find it and just go ahead and plug that into the comments. Jason Crandall, because like I said, I think that he probably gives one of the most succinct and understandable descriptions of samadhi, the 8 limbs of yoga. Yeah, that was published 3 hours ago. Okay. So I'm going to throw this in the comments because I think this could be a helpful way also to think about samadhi, which I had originally described as enlightenment, which it is. It is basically that's what it is the practice that we're doing in yoga is to reach this kind of higher self, the space of enlightenment where we not only feel one with all, but where we're really tuning into our true selves. So I highly recommend checking out that video. And if you haven't been following along and want to listen to these in order, again, those first 2 videos on An Introduction to Yoga are in the description. So with that, let's get into it. So we are on inward and outward turned consciousness. And we're going to continue to talk about samadhi. Samadhi is of 2 kinds, one turned outward, one turned inward. The outward turned consciousness is always first. You are in the stage of samadhi belonging to the outward turned waking consciousness when you can pass beyond the objects to the principles which those objects manifest, when through the form you catch a glimpse of the life. Darwin was in this stage when he glimpsed the truth of evolution. That is the outward turned samadhi of the physical body. This is technically the samprajna, the samadhi with consciousness, but to be better regarded, I think, as with consciousness outward turned, i.e., consciousness of objects. When the object disappears, that is when consciousness draws itself away from the sheath by which those objects are seen, then comes the asamprajnata samadhi, called the samadhi without consciousness. I prefer to call it the inward turned consciousness. as it is by turning away from the outer that this stage is reached. These two stages of samadhi follow each other on every plane. The intense concentration on objects in the first stage and the piercing thereby through the outer form of the underlying principle are followed by the turning away of the consciousness from the sheath which has served its purpose, and its withdrawal into self, i.e., into a sheath not yet recognized as a sheath. It is then, for a while, consciousness only of itself and not of the outer world. Then comes the cloud, the dawning sense again of an outer, a dim sensing of something other than itself. That again is followed by the functioning of the nigher sheath and the recognition of the objects of the next higher plane corresponding to that sheath. Hence, complete cycle is samprajnata samadhi, asamprajnata samadhi, mega, cloud, and then samprajnata samadhi of the next plane, and so on. So I want to acknowledge that this is highly academic. Again, these are lectures, so presumably read. I haven't dug too much into it, but spoken presumably to a school or university of students or intellectuals. So it just for context, this can be a little heady. So we take these pauses to see if we're kind of understanding what she is explaining here. So if we remember from yesterday's reading, she talks about these 4 different stages of the mind and how each stage we have these different planes. So, and the stages exist on every plane. So this is kind of where she's talking about samadhi, is this sort of outward facing first, and then turning inward. And then there's this cloud where we again turn outward onto the next plane of our being. So perhaps in the physical, well, she'll go on to explain some of this. So let's just keep reading. The cloud. This term in full Dharma Mega, cloud of righteousness or of religion, is one which is very scantily explained by the commentators. In fact, and again, this is 1907, in fact, the only explanation they give is that all the man's past karma of good gathers over him and pours down upon him a rain of blessing. Let us see if we cannot find something more than this meager interpretation. The term cloud is very often used in mystic literature of the West. The cloud on the mount, the cloud on the sanctuary, the cloud on the mercy seat are expressions familiar to the student, and the experience which they indicate is familiar to all lower phases and to some in its fullness. In its lower phases, it is the experience just noted, where the withdrawal of the consciousness into a sheath, not yet recognized as a sheath, is followed by the beginning of the functioning of that sheath, the first indication of which is the dim sensing of an outer. So, if I'm understanding this, right? Because samadhi, this idea of enlightenment, which most of us have maybe not experienced, or maybe we've caught a glimpse of that space of true understanding of who we are in truth, big T truth, if we want to talk about it like that. There's no, it's, and again, you got to see that Jason Crandall video that I just put in the comments, because it kind of explains samadhi a little bit better than I'm going to here, and a little bit even more accessibly than Miss Besant describes it here. But sort of this idea that there's nothing really attached. So a sheath or a sheath is this sort of, it's material, right? It's kind of, think about it as physical. There's something material there. And when we're in samadhi, we've really both connected so much with, and yet withdrawn so much from that physical, that we're not affected by the sheath. We're not affected by the outer world, but we're fully in who we truly are. We're fully in our love, in our peace, in our contentedness. And I think this is what makes samadhi so difficult to explain, because we're not in that space as living human beings that, work and have responsibilities and all of these things. We're not in that space often, if ever. And so let's continue on. So I'm going to read that section again. In its lower phases, it is the experience just noted, where the withdrawal of the consciousness into a sheath not yet recognized as a sheath is followed by the beginning of the functioning of that sheath, the first indication of which is the dim sensing of an outer. So that first phase here, what she's suggesting is that we're withdrawing from consciousness, or we're withdrawing from, and we understand that that's what's happening. You feel as though surrounded by a dense mist. So, right, you're still conscious of your withdrawing, conscious that you are not alone, but unable to see. Be still. Be patient, wait. Let your consciousness be in the attitude of suspense. Presently, the cloud will thin, and first in glimpses, then in its full beauty, the vision of a higher plane will dawn on your entranced sight. This entrance into a higher plane will repeat itself again and again, until your consciousness, centered on the Buddhic plane and its splendus having disappeared, as your consciousness withdraws even from that exquisite sheath, you find yourself in the true cloud, the cloud on the sanctuary, the cloud that veils the holiest, that hides the vision of the self. Then comes what seems to be a way of the very life, the letting go of the last hold on the tangible, the hanging in a void, the horror of great darkness, loneliness unspeakable. Endure, endure. So this is interesting because there's and apologies for the noise. I have a powerful kind of USB charger over here that is apparently getting hot, so the fan is running. So apologies if you can hear that in the background. But this is so interesting because, where was I? That cloud thing, the horror of great darkness. I think one of the reasons that sometimes we have such a hard time looking inward and sitting with thought, sitting with emotion, sometimes even sitting with our physical experience and sensation, is there's a fear that can come up. We all have varied experiences. And so to sit in quietness, sometimes the mind, it can be difficult to sit in our thoughts, to sit in our emotional space. And this is where she says, endure, endure. The practice of yoga and the practice of mindfulness, even just simply mindfulness, is that of observing and attaching nothing to that observance, no value judgment to what we observe. If darkness arrives, however we're interpreting that, there's a darkness over us, a darkness in our mind, in our heart, in our bodies, we're not making or passing a judgment on that. We're simply noticing. And it's that place of noticing that can be difficult. It can feel it can feel heaviness. It can feel lonely. It can feel horrifying at times. And so letting go, right? Anytime that we've had to let go of something that we held so precious, whether it was trying to manifest an idea or letting go of a relationship or letting go of someone who has passed. These are difficult things for us to do, and to let go of who we think we are as we go in deeper to who we truly are can feel very unsettling. To let go of, well, I always thought this was who I was, but now I'm feeling unsettled because I realize that there is a misalignment in my perception of self and the truth of that self. So, moving on, everything must go. Sounds like everything must go. It sounds like a sale. Nothing out of the eternal can help you. God only shines out in the stillness. As says the Hebrew, be still and know that I am God. In that silence, a voice shall be heard, the voice of the self. In that stillness, a life be felt, the life of the self. Void, a fullness shall be revealed, the fullness of the self. In that darkness, a light shall be seen, the glory of the self. The cloud shall vanish, and the shining of the self shall be made manifest. That which was a glimpse shall become a perpetual realization, and knowing the self and your unity with it, you shall enter into the peace that belongs to the self alone. see if unplugging some things here might turn this fan off quicker. So this is really, again, the level of spiritual depth here. If this is something of interest, of course, you're already listening. But this is something very interesting to me, this idea of both of stillness and this idea of these sort of opposites, right? In that darkness, a light shall be revealed. I think if I myself look across different times in my life, and I've thought about putting together a timeline where I kind of reframe what, how I perceived the situation in that moment versus how I might reframe it as a lesson or a tool or a redirection. It has often been, and maybe you can speak to this in the comments too, it has often been in those times where where I have felt emotionally heavy, or where I have felt a darkness, or where I have experienced either a sudden kind of what is perceivably a horrifying realization of something or someone, or a in those moments where it can sometimes feel like there's no light and no hope. Often, as I get quiet and listen to that deeper inner self, that truth, some might call God, some might call universe, whatever you call it, higher self. As I get still in that space, I realize, oh, yes, this does not feel good physically. My body might be in fight, flight, freeze, fawn. My mind might be slightly clouded by the trauma of an experience. Emotions might feel very heavy. However, when we can get into a space of stillness, we can start to see through that darkness clarity. We can become that light in that moment and start to recognize that fullness, that hope, that light, and understand who we are. So, for example, I had a really awful experience in one particular leadership group, and where, without getting too much into the weeds here, essentially there was basically a rejection, and then I recognized my personal leadership style, and I recognized who I was as a leader was out of alignment with the space that I was in. What I valued as a leader in community was out of alignment with what they valued. And so at first, the experience of actually being forced to resign from this program was, well, that experience, I definitely cried. I felt like a heaviness. I felt all the tension in my body. Everything was just felt awful. I was able to find some stillness, to quiet my mind enough to gain clarity on, okay, this is not the space for me. This is a big part of the reason, again, that I started the whole meditation for misfits thing is, okay, I don't quite fit, but who am I? And so I think, again, when we find these moments where we're these high stress environments, moments of rejection, moments of again, like a sudden, like kind of like a rug pulled from underneath you kind of realization. Those are the times that if we can get still, we can gain clarity as to how to continue to move forward with hope and in a space of light and clarity. All right. We are at lecture 2. So we're going to jump right into lecture 2. And again, reading from, and you'll see that in the description, reading from An Introduction to Yoga by Annie Besant, published in 1907. Lecture 2, Schools of Thought. Brothers, in studying psychology, anyone who is acquainted with the Sanskrit tongue must know how valuable that language is for precise and scientific dealing with the subject. The Sanskrit, or the well-made, the constructed, the built-together tongue, is one that lends itself better than any other to the elucidation of psychological difficulties. Over and over again, by the mere form of a word, a hint is given, an explanation or relation is suggested. The language is constructed in a fashion which enables a large number of meanings to be connoted by a single word, so that you may trace all allied ideas or truths or facts by this verbal connection when you are speaking or using Sanskrit. It has a limited number of important roots, and then an immense number of words constructed on those roots. Now, the root of the word yoga is a word that means to join, yuj, and that root appears in many languages, such as the English, of course, through the Latin, wherein you get jugere, jungir, to join. And out of that, a number of English words are derived and will at once suggest themselves to you: junction, conjunction, disjunction, and so on. The English word yoke, again, is derived from the same Sanskrit root, so that all through the various words or thoughts or facts connected with this one root, you are able to gather the meaning of the word yoga and to see how much that word covers in the ordinary process of the mind, and how suggestive many of the words connected with it are, acting, so to speak, as signposts to direct you along the road to the meaning. In other tongues, as in French, we have a word like rapport, used constantly in English, being en rapport, a French expression, but so anglicized that it is continually heard amongst ourselves. And that term, in some ways, is just of the meaning of the Sanskrit word yoga, to be in relation to be connected with, to enter into, to merge in, and so on. All these ideas are classified together under the one head of yoga. When you find Sri Krishna saying that yoga is equilibrium, in the Sanskrit, he is saying a perfectly obvious thing, because yoga implies balance, yoking, and the Sanskrit of equilibrium is samvata, togetherness. So that it is a perfectly simple, straightforward statement, anything very deep, but merely expressing one of the fundamental meanings of the word he is using. And so with another word, a word used in the commentary on the sutra I quoted before, which conveys to the Hindu a perfectly straightforward meaning. Yoga is samadhi. To an only English-knowing person, that does not convey any very definite idea. Each word needs explanation. To a Sanskrit-knowing man, the two words are obviously, for the word yoga, we have seen, means yoked together, and samadhi, derived from the root da, to place, with the prepositions sam and a, meaning completely together. Samadhi, therefore, literally means fully placing together. And its etymological equivalent in English would be to compose. Kam equals sam, posita equals place. Samadhi, therefore, means composing the mind. I love that. That truly is what this practice is about really finding our composure, composing the mind. That's beautiful. I'm going to write that down. Samadhi, composing the mind. Right, it's this practice of just continuing to gain clarity and composure. It's really beautiful. Okay. Samadhi, therefore, means composing the mind, collecting it together, checking all distractions. Thus, by philological as well as by practical investigation, the two words yoga and samadhi are inseparably linked together. And when Vyasa, the commentator, says yoga is the composed mind, he is conveying a clear and significant idea as to what is implied in yoga. Although samadhi has come to mean by a natural sequence of ideas the trance state which results from perfect composure, its original meaning should not be lost sight of. Thus, in explaining yoga, one is often at a loss for the English equivalent of the manifold meanings of the Sanskrit tongue, and I earnestly advise those of you who can do so, at least to acquaint yourself sufficiently with this admirable language to make the literature of yoga more intelligible to you than it can be to a person who is completely ignorant of Sanskrit. Yeah, one of the things that I have learned lightly across the various yoga teacher trainings that I've taken is of the Sanskrit, but haven't gotten so deep into it, mostly just the postures, right? Our Tadasana, mountain pose, our Uttanasana, forward fold, our Virabhadrasana, 1, 2, 3, warrior, 1, 2, 3. But I do think that there is something, and I have heard this said, that there is something to using the Sanskrit in a respectful way, doing our best not to culturally appropriate, right? Namaste, for example, is technically just a general greeting. And oftentimes here in the West, particularly, we end our classes, and I still do. I'll greet and close class with namaste. we'll end our classes with a greeting. But how I think about that is we're closing, right? Because we end in corpse pose. We end in this sort of, if you want to think of this sort of like letting go of busyness, letting go of the movement. We end in that Shavasana corpse pose. So in a way, kind of closing with namaste is a greeting to the renewed self after having practiced. So that's kind of how I just maybe justify it a bit. All right, moving on. So again, here she just said, hey, should learn Sanskrit. At least a little bit. Its relation to Indian philosophies. Let me ask you to think for a while on the place of yoga in its relation to two of the great Hindu schools of philosophical thought, for neither the Westerner nor the non-Sanskrit knowing Indian can ever really understand the translations of the chief Indian books, now current here and in the West, and the force of all the allusions they make, unless they acquaint themselves in some degree with the outlines of these great schools of philosophy, they being the very foundation on which these books are built. Take the Bhagavad Gita. Probably there are many who know that book fairly well, who use it as the book to help in the spiritual life, who are not familiar with most of its precepts. But you must always be more or less in a fog in reading it, unless you realize the fact that it is founded on a particular Indian philosophy and that the meaning of nearly all the technical words in it is practically limited by their meaning in philosophy known as Samkhya. There are certain phrases belonging rather to the Vedanta, but the great majority of Samkhyan, and it is, but the great majority are Samkhyan, and it is taken for granted that the people reading or using the book are familiar with the outline of Samkhyan philosophy. I do not want to take you into details, but I must give you the leading ideas of the philosophy. For if you grasp these, you will not only read your Bhagavad Gita with much more intelligence than before, but you will be able to use it practically for yogic purposes in a way that, without this knowledge, is almost impossible. Alike in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the terms of Samkhyan, and historically yoga is based on Samkhya so far as its philosophy is concerned. Samkhya does not concern itself with the existence of a deity, but only with the becoming of a universe, the order of evolution. Hence, it is often called Nirishvara Samkhya, the Samkhya without God. But so closely it is bound up with the yoga system that the latter is called Sesvara Samkhya, with God. For its understanding, therefore, I must outline part of the Samkhya philosophy, that part which deals with the relation of spirit and matter. Note the difference from this Vedantic conception of self and not self, and then find the reconciliation in the theosophic statement of the facts in nature. The directions which fall from the lips of the Lord of Yoga in the Gita may sometimes seem to you opposed to each other and contradictory, because they are in the Samkhyan and sometimes in the Vedantic terms, starting from different standpoints, one looking at the world from the standpoint of matter, the other from the standpoint of spirit. If you are a student of theosophy, Then the knowledge of the facts will enable you to translate the different phrases. That reconciliation and understanding of these apparently contradictory phrases is the object to which I would ask your attention now. The Samkhya school starts with the statement that the universe consists of two factors. Or more accurately, spirits and matter. The spirit is called Purusha, the man, and each spirit is an individual. Purusha is a unit of consciousness. They are all the same nature, but distinct everlastingly the one from the other. Of these units, there are many, countless Purushas are to be found in the world of men. But while they are countless in number, they are identical in nature. They are homogeneous. Every Purusha has 3 characteristics, and these 3 are alike in all. One characteristic is awareness. It will become cognition. So I, myself, I'm going to take some notes here. Okay. So, Purusha, one characteristic is awareness. It will become cognition. The second of the characteristics is life or prana. It will become activity. The third characteristic is immutability, the essence of eternity. It will become will. Eternity is not, as some mistakenly think, everlasting time. Everlasting time has nothing to do with eternity. Time and eternity are 2 altogether different things. Eternity is changeless, immutable, simultaneous. No succession in time, albeit everlasting, if such could be, could give eternity. The fact that Purusha has this attribute of immutability tells us that he is eternal, for changelessness is a mark of the eternal. Such are the 3 attributes of Purusha according to Samkhya. Apologies, by the way, if I am pronouncing these terribly. If you are a student or expert in Sanskrit and have some translation for me, feel free to throw that pronunciation, the correct pronunciation for me. Feel free to throw that pronunciation in the comments. Though these are not the same in nomenclature as the Vedantic, Sat, Chit, Ananda, yet they are practically identical. Awareness or cognition is Chit, life or force is Sat, and immutability, the essence of eternity, is Ananda. Over against these Purushas, homogeneous units, countless in number, stands Prakriti, matter, the second in the Samkhya duality. Prakriti is one. Purushas are many. Prakriti is a continuum. Purushas are discontinuous, being innumerable homogeneous units. Continuity is the mark Prakriti. Pause for a moment. Let us pause for a moment. Pause for a moment on the name Prakriti. Prakriti, 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 prakriti. Maybe one of these days I'll have some time to actually read ahead and get the pronunciations down. But for now, we'll focus on practice over perfection. Prakriti is a continuum. Purushas are discontinuous, being innumerable, homogeneous units. Continuity is the mark of Prakriti. Pause for a moment on the name Prakriti. Let us investigate its root meaning. The name indicates its essence. Pra means forth, and kri is the root make. Prakriti thus means forth making. Matter is that which enables the essence of being to become. That which is being is istence, becomes existence, outbeing. By matter, and to describe matter as forth-making is to give its essence in a single word. Only by Prakriti can spirit or Purusha forth-make or manifest himself. Without the presence of Prakriti, Purusha is helpless, a mere abstraction. Only by the in Purusha make manifest his powers. Prakriti has also 3 characteristics, the well-known gunas, attributes or qualities. These are rhythm, mobility, and inertia. Rhythm enables awareness to become cognition. Mobility enables life to become activity. Inertia enables immutability to become will. So again, in the YouTube video that I shared in the comments, if you're following this on LinkedIn, I don't think it shared the comment in that space. So apologies. Yoga. I'll throw this up on the screen. If you go to Jason Crandall Yoga, one of his latest videos is on samadhi, and he also talks about Purusha and Prakriti, I think in an even more accessible way and less kind of academic way than Annie Besant here is explaining it in this lecture. So again, would highly recommend checking that out for even more clarity on those ideas. Now the concept as to the relation of spirit to matter is a very peculiar one, and confused ideas about it give rise to many misconceptions. If you grasp it, the Bhagavad Gita becomes illuminated, and all the phrases about action and actor and the mistake of saying I act become easy to understand as implying technical Samkhyan ideas. The 3 qualities of Prakriti, when Prakriti is thought of as away from Purusha, are in equilibrium, motionless, poised, the one against the other, counterbalancing and neutralizing each other, so that matter is called jada, unconscious, dead. But in the presence of Purusha, all is changed. When Purusha is in I don't know all the words, even the English ones. Propinquity to matter. Now, I was an English major, but again, I don't know all the words. So let's look at the definition of propinquity, because I can't possibly be the only one. The state of being close to something or to someone or something, proximity. So propinquity. Thank you for indulging my ignorance of that word. Propinquity to matter. Then there is a change in matter, not outside, but in it. Purusha acts on prakriti by proximity. Can we just say proximity? By propinquity, says Vyasa. It comes near prakriti, and prakriti begins to live. The coming near is a figure of speech, an adaptation to our ideas of time and space. For we cannot posit nearness of that which is timeless and spaceless spirit. By the word propinquity is indicated an influence exerted by Purusha on prakriti, and this, where material objects are concerned, would be brought about by their propinquity. If a magnet be brought near to a piece of soft iron, or an electrified body be brought near to a neutral one, certain changes are wrought in the soft iron or in the neutral body by that bringing near. The propinquity of the magnet makes the soft iron a magnet. The qualities of the magnet are produced in it. It manifests poles. It attracts steel. It attracts or repels the end of an electric needle. In the presence of a positively electrified body, the electricity in a neutral body is rearranged, and the positive retreats while the negative gathers near the electrified body. An internal change has occurred in both cases from the propinquity of another object. So with Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha does nothing, but from Purusha there comes out an influence, as in the case of the magnetic influence. The three gunas under this influence of Purusha undergo a marvelous change. I do not know what words to use in order not to make a mistake in putting it. You cannot say that Prakriti absorbs the influence. You can hardly say that it reflects the Purusha. But the presence of Purusha brings about certain internal changes, causes a difference in the equilibrium of the three gunas in Prakriti. The three gunas were in a state of equilibrium. No guna was manifest. One guna was balanced against another. What happens when Purusha influence Prakriti? The quality of awareness in Purusha is taken up by or reflected in the guna called sattva, rhythm, and it becomes cognition in Prakriti. The quality that we call life in Purusha is taken up by or reflected in the guna called rajas, mobility, and it becomes force, energy, activity in Prakriti. The quality that we call immutability in Purusha is taken up by or reflected in the guna called tamas, inertia, and shows itself out as will or desire in Prakriti. In that balanced equilibrium of Prakriti, a change has taken place by the mere propinquity of or presence of the Purusha. The Purusha has lost nothing, but at the same time, a change has taken place in matter. Cognition has appeared in it. Activity, force has appeared in it. With this change in Prakriti, another change occurs. The three attributes of Purusha cannot be separated from each other, nor can the three attributes of Prakriti be separated each from each other, each from each. Hence, rhythm, while appropriating awareness, is under the influence of the whole 3-in-1 Purusha and cannot but also take up subordinately life and immutability as activity and will, and so with mobility and inertia. In combinations, one quality or another may predominate, and we may have combinations which show predominantly awareness rhythm or life mobility or immutability inertia. The combinations in which awareness rhythm or cognition predominates. The combinations in which awareness rhythm or cognition predominates become mind in nature, the subject or subjective half of nature. Combinations in which either of the other two predominates become the object or objective half of nature, the force and matter of the Western scientist. And there's a note on that final, on that line there, force and matter of the Western scientist. A friend notes that the first is the Suddha Sattva of the Ramanuja school, and the second and third, the Prakriti, or spirit matter, in the lower sense of the same. So again, this is a lot to, can be a lot to consume. Very heady, very academic, but we are getting close to that hour mark. This is kind of a longer section, so I think we're just actually going to pause here for today. So kind of getting deeper into looking at the philosophy, going deeper into the philosophy of yoga and using and describing, defining, and interpreting these Sanskrit concepts and ideas, words, to essentially, again, we're really still talking about samadhi. So Purusha and Prakriti are two kind of sides of samadhi, where Prakriti is has these three qualities, and Purusha acts on or can act on Prakriti to create a kind of internal change. And I'm going to kind of go through this again to make sure that I can give a proper recap when we come back to it. I may pop on here over the weekend, though I'll be traveling. If I have kind of the space to do that. But otherwise, we'll be back to this next week, and maybe we'll do this kind of twice a week here for these readings. But do feel free to share in the comments your thoughts on this, anything that maybe you're interested in getting more clarification on. And again, it just so happens that Jason Crandall, having created that video and published it only just today, was perfect timing for reading this section, because again, I think he describes samadhi and these concepts of purusha and prakriti in a little bit more, even more accessible way than our author here does. So again, do check out that video. And if you are interested in hearing the first few sections, if you haven't been following along and have just caught this kind of in the middle, we're currently on lecture 2, and we'll be continuing lecture 2, and lecture 1 is in videos 1, 2, and part of this video. So with that, I think we will close with 3 deep breaths. When we continue, we'll still be on lecture 2, and we will still be on the section titled, where are we? Apologies, I will find us. Oh, I went too far. We're on lecture 2 in an introduction to yoga, and the section called, its relation to Indian philosophies. And by its, we're talking about Sanskrit. So we're continuing on our discussion of Sanskrit, our discussion of samadhi, purusha, and prakriti. And we're going to be in the middle of a section when we come back. So with that together, let's find a few deep breaths. We'll find 3 deep breaths in through the nose, exhaling through the mouth. A deep breath in. Open mouth, exhale. Deep breath in. Sigh it out. Deep breath in. And with that, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being you. Take care of yourselves out there. Peace.